Coming up this week, the Lucid Air is named Car of the Year by MotorTrend. President Biden panders to GM. Reservations for the 2023 Nissan Ariya are now open, and much more. Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 87 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and answers to your questions about electric vehicles. Before we get started with the news this week, I want to thank our podcast partner, Titan Auto and Tire in Moseley, Virginia, for their support. Titan is one of the very few independent shops in Central Virginia that are qualified to work on EVs, and from hybrids to Hummers, they fix everything. For more information and to schedule an appointment for your vehicle, go to TitanAutoTire.com. That's TitanAutoTire.com. All right, so starting us off this week is some news from the LA Auto Show where Kia has unveiled their EV9 Concept. Motor One had all the details for us, saying it has a strikingly angular appearance on the outside, but a minimalist interior with soft curves. Kia says that the sharp-edged exterior design takes inspiration from the shapes of crystals and rocks. As an EV, it doesn't need a traditional grille opening. Instead, there's a body-colored bar across the nose. The lights in this section aren't visible when they aren't in use. Sequential patterns of illumination welcome the driver when the person approaches. On the outer edges, there are vertical daytime running lights. The hood has a vented duct near the base of the windshield, and since there's no engine, the opening isn't necessary for cooling. So for the EV9, Kia has installed a solar panel there to charge the batteries when it's not plugged in. In profile, there are slab-sided panels that angle inward at the bottom of the doors, and like many concepts, there are suicide doors, but this element is unlikely to be on the production version. Cameras replace the side view mirrors to make the vehicle sleeker. The rear of the vehicle has a triangular shape for the D-pillars, and there are Y-shaped taillights. The lower portion of the rear hatchback has one of the very few rounded sections of the design. And for the interior of the EV9, it lacks the sharp edges of the exterior. The driver looks at a 27-inch display that runs about halfway across the dashboard, and a panoramic glass roof lets in plenty of natural light. Kia says that the EV9 will be capable of driving up to 300 miles on a charge, and when attached to a 350 kilowatt charger, it would be capable of going from 10% to 80% level of charge in 20 to 30 minutes. The crossover rides on the Electric Global Modular Platform, or EGMP. And I don't know about you, but I think this really looks like a great addition to the Kia lineup, and I hope they bring it into production soon. Next, Lucid is celebrating this week as their Lucid Air sedan has earned the MotorTrend Car of the Year award. Frank Marcus of MotorTrend staff writes, "The Air sedan's level of innovation and sophistication are as fresh and unexpected as a multicolored tree bark." MotorTrend were wowed by the numbers that Lucid has been touting recently, up to 1,111 horsepower and 1,390 pound-feet of torque in the Air Dream Edition P, which P meaning performance, and up to 520 miles of EPA official range in the Dream R Edition, R being for, you guessed it, range. Now, don't automatically be impressed by those numbers. CEO Peter Rawlinson says anyone can buy big numbers by installing giant motors and batteries. Rather, what sets Lucid apart is the way they achieve these numbers, which, as a whole, is how MotorTrend decided to award them with the Car of the Year prestige. With EPA combined ratings that range from 111 to 131 miles per gallon equivalent, the Lucid Air is America's most efficient large electric sedan, ranking just ahead of the Tesla Model S and well ahead of other EV models. So what's so special about the engineering and efficiency that goes into the Lucid Air? Well, a lot, as it would turn out. The tiny, power-dense motor that generates those headline-grabbing specs does so with an innovative new stator winding consisting of 24 square copper wires that are woven into a convenient assembly requiring minimal bonding. To better manage the intense heat these wires generate under full power, Lucid moved the cooling passages down to the narrow spaces between winding channels, utilizing magnetic field dead zones in the stator body. The rotor squeezes more reluctance torque out of the same amount of rare earth magnets by optimizing their positioning. Then, instead of multiplying the motor's torque and then sending it through beefy differential gears, Lucid packages a small, light differential inside the rotor. And yes, this design requires 2 reduction gears, but placing a compact planetary unit on each side of the motor keeps things light and results in a complete drive unit with triple the power density of leading competitors. And while the chemistry of the cylindrical batteries is conventional, the pack is designed to simplify automated assembly in a patented and award-winning injection molded case that incorporates all of the power conducting bus bars. The cells connect to these bars via new lower resistance ribbon connectors instead of wires, and heat gets conducted away from the ends of the cells instead of from the sides. Lucid says this results in more efficient cooling and easier installation, and it eliminates heavy, costly adhesive in the pack. The entire electric powertrain was designed and developed in-house, including the Wonderbox electronic controller that manages the Air's 900-volt electrical system. It's bidirectional, so it can provide jump charging to other EVs. It can also manage 19.2 kilowatts of level 2 home charging. It converts DC fast charging power from 400 volts in older stations, and it can accept more than 300 kilowatts on the latest 800 volt systems. That makes Lucid Air's today's fastest charging EV capable of adding 300 miles in just 20 minutes. The initial Lucid Air Dream and Grand Touring models will deliver 451 to 520 miles of range from just 118 and 112 kilowatt hours of battery capacity, respectively. Later, a 92 kilowatt hour pack will provide 400-ish miles of range and several more inches of foot and legroom in the back seat. Lucid is squeezing a remarkable number of miles from each kilowatt hour in this S-Class competitive luxury sedan, thanks in part to Formula One racing derived aerodynamic tricks that contribute to a drag coefficient of just 0.20. These tricks include leveraging the low-pressure properties of vortex airflow to help suck extra air into the front cooling ducts and to keep air attached to the smooth underbody's diffuser fences. The wing shape of its fascia air curtain ducts actually produces negative drag, and its hood ducts exhaust high-pressure air from the front. Narrow tires and a low roofline minimize frontal area to lower overall drag enough to allow most models to achieve higher efficiency on the highway than in the city, and that is very rare for EVs and plug-ins. MotorTrend continues to say that the Lucid Air did not instantly win their hearts. Many judges expressed dire concern that if Lucid fails to rectify the many wonky quirks that the prototype suffered, the brand and car could go down in history as a 21st century Tucker or Chevy Vega. Some older judges highlighted the many similarities between this car and company and the Tesla that was awarded in 2013. In the long run, MotorTrend says they believe electric vehicles are the way forward for cars and mobility, and the way forward for electric vehicles is continuous improvement for electric batteries, motors, and charging. That's why the great-looking, strong-performing, tech-leapfrogging Lucid Air is MotorTrend's 2022 Car of the Year. And honestly, after reading more into it, I'm not surprised at all. The Lucid Air is one of the best engineered vehicles on the road today. The 2023 Nissan Ariya is coming, and last Tuesday, the automaker announced reservations are officially open for the SUV, along with current pricing. The least expensive way into an Ariya will cost buyers only $47,125 after a $1,175 destination charge, but the costs climb to just over $60,000 when opting for the top-of-the-line model. The trim breakdown for the Ariya is pretty simple, with the Venture Plus trim serving as the base model, Ariya Evolve Plus as a mid-grade option, and the Platinum Plus as a range-topping version. For those that take part in the reservation process, there's one special edition model available too. And that's the Premier trim, which won't actually be sold at dealers when Nissan starts stocking them with EVs next year. Every trim except the Platinum Plus features an 87 kilowatt-hour battery pack with 238 horsepower and 221 pound-feet of torque. EPA estimates aren't in yet, but Nissan thinks it'll do 300 miles or so on a full charge. Front-wheel drive is the only option for these three trims. For the Platinum Plus model, it gets a dual motor setup to create an all-wheel drive system with the same battery pack. However, the extra motor produces a total of 389 horsepower and 442 pound-feet of torque. More power from the same battery results in a 265-mile range estimate from Nissan, however. But if you're like me, more performance with a slight compromise in range, that's the one that I'd go for. So it's still too early for full breakdowns of what comes with each trim in terms of features and comforts, but a step up from the Venture Plus trim into the Evolve Plus, the price grows to $50,125 and the Platinum Plus inches to $60,125. Not so curiously, that's priced almost identically to an entry-level Tesla Model Y. As for this special Ariya Premium trim, it starts at $54,625, and we do know that this model boasts some unique wheels, badges, and illuminated kick plates. One of the most significant features of the Ariya is that it comes standard with CCS combo for fast charging, and it has active thermal management on the battery pack. So it looks like Nissan has learned from their lessons with the Leaf, and they're making some serious improvements on the Ariya. So if you're ready to get into an Ariya next year, the process seems pretty simple. All it takes is a $500 refundable deposit, and from there, customers select an EV certified Nissan dealership for delivery. All of this can be done online with the option of having the dealer deliver to the customer's home, or if you're feeling old school, you can pick it up from the local dealer instead. First deliveries start in early fall next year, so about 12 months away, but all-wheel drive models won't be available until late fall. And, the more I think about it, I kind of like the idea of dealerships still being involved a little bit. Not necessarily in the sales process as things stand right now, but one of the big things is that as the EV transition progresses, potential buyers like you or me who probably know way more about the cars than the salespeople we're talking to, there will be less and less of us out there. The people that will be buying EVs in the coming years will be people that just happen to be buying their next car. The fact that it's electric won't necessarily be the reason that they choose an EV. But it's no secret that currently auto dealers are not too popular when it comes to electric vehicle advocates, or with car buyers in general for that matter. Most dealerships outside of EV hotspots like California make little or no effort to sell EVs, and many shoppers have actually reported that salespeople try to steer them away from EVs to gas-powered cars. And several studies have found that dealerships are somewhat of a bottleneck for EVs, and even my personal experience has involved a salesperson making up information about the car that I was asking questions about. However, EVNX says that before we start painting dealerships as a bunch of gas-loving Luddites, we should consider that the dealership side has their own story. EVs are still unfamiliar to most consumers, and it takes valuable time to try to explain how they work to shoppers. Most salespeople don't have the needed product knowledge, and EV sales are right now such a small part of the market that there's very little incentive for them to learn. Charging can be a confusing topic, but it's invariably the first thing that a potential EV buyer asks about, and most probably don't get the answers that they need from the dealership. As John Volker wrote in a recent issue of Charged, a pilot program in Oregon demonstrated that educating both salespeople and shoppers about their charging options boosts sales of EVs. A startup called ChargeWay has introduced several products and services to educate both shoppers and sales staff, including a set of standardized symbols for EV charging, kiosks to showcase EV charging options, and a charging education platform for dealers' websites. Now, Volker reports in Car and Driver that the North American Auto Dealers Association, NADA, will work with ChargeWay to teach EV sales techniques to its member dealers and to help them get up to speed with charging, available incentives for EV purchases, and other very important topics. Boy, isn't this great news. Dealers won't have the option of ignoring EVs for much longer. It is right on their doorstep. It is coming. Every automaker in the US market will be offering at least one EV within the next few years, and their lineups of fossil burners are expected to dwindle between now and 2035. That's, of course, the year that California and probably many other states are expected to end the sale of new internal combustion engine vehicles. The CEO of the National Auto Dealers Association, Mike Stanton, told Car and Driver, quote, "We looked at a number of different training tools and consumer apps and found ChargeWay best answered the questions our dealers were asking about EV charging, how long it takes, how home charging works, what incentives are available, and even how temperature and speed affect an EV road trip," end quote. So I couldn't be more excited about this. It looks like there is a viable path forward for EVs and dealerships to coexist, and that is only good for the buyer and for the EV community at large. At the EICMA Milan Motorcycle Show later this week, Kawasaki is expected to unveil 3 new motorcycles, and while the first 2 will likely fall into their sport and adventure touring categories, the third has been the subject of wider speculation, but very well may be the company's first true electric motorcycle. Micah from Electrek writes, "This wouldn't be the first time Kawasaki took to the world's foremost motorcycle show to unveil its electric ambitions. Just 2 years ago, at the last show before the pandemic, Kawasaki wowed onlookers with their first public revealing of its electric motorcycle ambitions. A prototype electric motorcycle was unveiled as a part of an EV development project, but little was known about the bike at the time. It was apparent that the bike was built on a Ninja 650 base and featured a 4-speed gearbox, but that was about as much as the world could glean from the prototype on display. Once Kawasaki shared the prototype bike's specs, though, the excitement quickly cooled. With only a peak output of 20 kilowatts or 27 horsepower and a lower continuous power rating of 10 kilowatts or 13 horsepower, it was a Ninja in frame only. But that was a whole 2 years ago, and Kawasaki have something new for us to see at this year's show. It would certainly fit with the pace of development, as we've seen several patents for electric motorcycle designs come out of Kawasaki's R&D department, and considering that Kawasaki has pledged to convert all of its motorcycles to entirely electric power by 2035, the time now is ripe for the company to finally roll out its first electric motorcycle. Patents have revealed that Kawasaki is making progress on its electric motorcycle development. And Kawasaki isn't alone among the major Japanese motorcycle manufacturers in dragging its feet on electric vehicles. And honestly, we can lump the car manufacturers into that too. We've also seen delayed progress on so many EV ambitions from that country. When it comes to motorcycles, the big 4, Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and of course Kawasaki, none of them have really focused on full-sized electric motorcycles. Honda's probably gotten the closest with their electric scooters. All 4 companies had previously signed onto a consortium to develop swappable batteries for electric motorcycles, though we've yet to see any concrete evidence of developments from that agreement. Should Kawasaki ultimately unveil a full-size motorcycle at this year's EICMA show, it might have needed to develop its own battery without the help of the other major Japanese motorcycle manufacturers. But regardless of what happens, I'll keep an eye out and give you an update on next week's podcast. And from 2 wheels to no wheels, the high seas are getting electrified. The first fully electric cargo ship has launched this week in Norway. 0 emissions and actually soon 0 crew too. The world's first fully electric autonomous cargo vessel was unveiled in Norway, a small and promising step towards reducing the maritime industry's climate footprint. The ship, named Yara Birkeland, shown off to media last Friday, will eliminate the need for around 40,000 truck journeys a year that are now fueled by diesel. The 80-meter, 3,200-ton ship will begin 2 years of working trials during which it will be fine-tuned to learn how to maneuver on its own. The wheelhouse could disappear altogether in, as they say, 3 to 5 years, once the vessel makes 7.5 nautical mile trips on its own with the aid of sensors. While the distance the Yara Birkeland will cover may be short, it will face many obstacles. It will have to navigate a narrow fjord and sail under 2 bridges while managing currents and heavy traffic from other merchant ships, pleasure craft, and kayaks before docking at one of Norway's busiest ports. The next few months will be a learning period for sure. On board the Yara Birkeland, the traditional machine room has been replaced by 8 battery compartments, giving the vessel a capacity of 6.8 megawatt hours sourced from renewable hydroelectricity in the local area. And I know that a lot of you and myself, my first reaction to this was, autonomous? Really? Is that the best idea for a cargo ship? Something that's, it's 3,200 tons. And that's its dead weight, like when it's empty. Imagine how much something like this weighs when it's full. And to expect that it will learn to be able to take care of currents and navigating all of the other boats that are out there. I don't know. I'm not sure this is the best idea, but you know what? Somebody that knows a lot more than I do, and probably, no offense, a lot more than you, has figured all of this out and has determined that where they are testing this, it is something that might be an appropriate solution. So we'll see. But it's good that they're replacing the need for all those trucks, removing the need for burning fossil fuels, and helping to clean up one of the dirtiest areas of pollution when it comes to vehicles in the world. Vehicles that are on the water, especially big cargo ships, don't need to adhere to the same emissions standards as passenger vehicles do for the road. The maritime sector, which is responsible for almost 3% of all man-made emissions, aims to reduce its emissions by 40% by 2030 and 50% by 2050. Despite that, the sector has seen a rise in emissions in the recent years. International and domestic shipping and fishing combined, the industry emitted more than 1 billion tons of greenhouse gases in 2018, up from 962 million tons in 2012, according to the latest figures from the International Maritime Organization. And by itself, the Yara Birkeland's contribution to global climate efforts will be just a drop in the ocean, eliminating 678 tons of, not million tons, just tons, of carbon dioxide per year churned out by the redundant trucks. And experts don't expect electric vehicles to become a universal solution for the industry anytime soon, but hey, it's a start. Okay, so those of you who have been watching or listening to the podcast for a while know that I try to stay fairly positive when it comes to the wealth of EV news that comes out week after week. But this week, I can't help but touch on something that, honestly, I can't ignore it. It's the Biden story, and if you know what I'm talking about, then feel free to skip ahead. But if you don't, then you need to know this. Last week, myself and much of the electric vehicle community was absolutely aghast after President Joe Biden visited GM's Factory Zero in Detroit, Michigan. He was there at the opening of the factory to celebrate GM and their continued push to electrification. That in of itself is great. There's nothing wrong with that. We do need to celebrate the future of GM's ambitions. And while speaking to the audience, Biden did a few things that might be, that are absolutely questionable. He patted GM CEO Mary Barra's back, stating that the executive was leading the auto sector's transition to electric vehicles. He basically was giving credit to Mary Barra and GM for leading the automotive industry in electric vehicles. Biden also praised GM for their goal in shifting to an all-electric future by 2035, a timeframe that, in a lot of ways, is quite conservative considering the rise of American EV companies like Tesla, Rivian, Lucid, and, at this point, a few others as well. Biden's statements about the GM CEO leading the electric vehicle transition are pretty interesting, seeing as the automaker is the company that chose to kill the modern electric car in the past by literally crushing the EV1. Mary Barra, while a notable proponent of electric vehicles, also doesn't have the best record today, seeing as she noted that GM conducted appropriate diligence regarding the $2 billion deal with Nikola Motors for the Badger pickup. And of course, the Badger, as it turned out, didn't exist beyond CGI renders. And Nikola, well, they are but a shell of their former selves. But aside from Biden's comments, which I'll get back to in a second, one of the most ironic aspects of his visit to Factory Zero was the fact that he was driving around in a Hummer EV. And earlier this month, Democrats released an updated spending and climate measure that expanded the administration's proposed tax credit for zero-emission vehicles, capping the price of electric pickups at $80,000. The Hummer EV, when it gets released next year, will be priced at about $100,000 to $113,000, which means that particular vehicle, the one he chose to highlight, is actually overpriced for the tax credit to begin with. And a base Hummer, which is priced below, just below, like barely below, that $80,000 threshold, that's not expected to be released until spring of 2024. So before I continue on, for those of you who haven't heard it, let me go ahead and play the clip of Biden at GM's factory so you can hear him in his own words and kind of make your own decision about what has happened.
In the auto industry, Detroit's leading the world in electric vehicles. You know how critical it is? Mary, I can remember talking to you way back in January about the need for America to lead in electric vehicles. And I can remember your dramatic announcement that by 2035, GM would be 100% electric. You changed the whole story, Mary, wherever you are. There you are. You did, Mary. You electrified the entire automobile industry. I'm serious. You led, and it matters.
I'm sure there's a lot of talk on this already. I mean, I've seen it. Jana Kreider over at Clean Technica has an amazing article on this, by the way. So if you haven't read that, go check it out. And I'm not sure really how much I have to add. I'm sure you all know how I feel about this without me saying anything, but I'm going to say it anyway. The administration's blatant snub of an American company who already builds electric vehicles and has done so for a decade, a company that makes the most American-made passenger vehicle of any kind, and really to snub the hardworking people who have accomplished so many great things, it's a disgrace. There already is a company that leads in EVs, and no, it is not GM. These comments that were made at the GM event, yeah, I get it. It was a GM event. Praise GM for what they are doing, what they've done, and what they're going to do. No problem. But don't give them credit that somebody else has accomplished. Don't take away from Tesla's accomplishments and give it to GM, saying that they are the leaders in the electric industry, that they are the ones that are making the world a better place. GM currently isn't. And the Biden administration has generally ignored Tesla, and that's one thing. Praising GM, that's another thing. I don't necessarily have much of an issue with either of those. I mean, ignoring Tesla is just kind of like a what the moment. But to take all of the credit that the hardworking Americans at Tesla have earned and then give that to somebody else that, quite frankly, has had somewhat of an embarrassing history when it comes to EVs, that's something else entirely, and it's shameful. These are not comments coming from a place of ignorance. This is 100% crafted strategy. It's unpatriotic and unfortunate that the administration would take this route. GM is not pioneering the electric auto industry. GM doesn't even have an electric vehicle for sale right now. You can't buy a single GM vehicle right now that is electric. Not one. And I know some of you are shouting at me right now, what about the Chevy Bolt EV? Well, you can't buy that right now either. General Motors is keeping the Chevy Bolt EV and EUV plant down for the rest of the year as it continues to work through the recall on its electric vehicles. The Orion assembly plant production was halted originally in August after GM announced the recall for the Bolt EVs and EUVs, which at this point is more than 141,000 vehicles. Of course, for the potential battery fire risk, I think there was only 13 fires that happened. So statistically, that's not a huge amount. The recall is for all of them. And as a result, GM stopped production of new Bolt EVs and EUVs. And right now they are prioritizing the recalled Bolts with new battery modules. They then restarted production in November to make replacement Bolts for customers having their current Bolts fixed, but then production went down again last week on November 15th. In a Thursday note to employees that was obtained by the Detroit News, Orion plant director Reuben Jones said, quote, "Beyond 2021, our production schedule continues to be dictated by what is needed to help customers affected by the recall, as opposed to filling orders for new vehicles," end quote. So if you want an electric vehicle from GM, it looks like you're going to have to wait. And lastly, this week, I want to share a story that I came across on Electrek about an EV school bus in Alaska, of all places, an electric vehicle in the coldest of cold. The bus is picking up and dropping off kids in the town of Tok in southeastern Alaska. Tok Transportation bought the bus with an Alaskan Energy Authority grant, and it replaced one of its 7 diesel school buses that they use. The electric school bus is kept in a bus barn and charged by solar panels on the roof, as well as from power from the grid. State regulations require that the bus's interior is kept to a minimum of 45 degrees, which doesn't sound very hot, but keep in mind that this is Alaska. The Talk Transportation co-owner, Gerald Blackard, explained via Alaska Public Media how the electric school bus is performing in extreme cold temperatures. And he said, quote, "It has not missed a single day of school. What we found out is that the bus heated well. It kept the interior at a normal temperature, even with a little bit of insulation on the batteries and kind of covering up the engine compartment to try to hold in as much heat as we could. We were still using more energy to heat the interior of the bus than we were using to drive the bus." On January 27th, we had 38 degrees below zero. The bus's efficiency that day was 3.46 kilowatts per mile. So this fall, in August to September, we were running between 1.4 and 1.7 kilowatts per mile, end quote. Now notice that is not miles per kilowatt hour, that is kilowatt hour per mile. Even though he said kilowatts, that's still something that I've noticed even experts in the EV industry confuse kilowatts and kilowatt hours. But that would be kilowatt hours total energy usage. And honestly, that's a lot, but still, it's pretty neat to know that even in the most extreme climates, I mean, Alaska, when it comes to cold, is probably one of the more extreme climates there is. They are showing that you can still have an electric vehicle, that it can be done. So that's your show for this week. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Please share this with your friends and anybody that you know that is interested in electric vehicles. I do invite your feedback via email to hello@ev-resource.com, and you can always leave a comment on the YouTube video, and don't forget to subscribe. That way you'll get all of the future shows delivered to you automatically. You don't have to go searching around for the EV Resource podcast week after week on your favorite podcast platform. If you do want to listen to any of the previous shows, you can find them on the webpage under the podcast section or any platform that you are currently listening to this. So thank you so much for being with me, and I'll catch you next week.